Instead of being supportive, why do you think women gossip and bring each other down? Hello, Enrich community. This is your virtual bestie, Simran Adderley. Welcome back to the Enrich Podcast, the show where we explore topics that inspire personal and professional growth. We have Kristina here with us today. Welcome to the show, Kristina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Kristina Hayer is the owner of Solace Wellness Hayer Wellness, which is a private clinical counseling practice. She has been a counselor for 3.5 years now and is also a spiritual business coach who uses neural manifestation, psychology, and science to help individuals expand past their limiting fears and beliefs to excel in their purpose-driven business. Once again, Kristina, welcome and thank you for taking out time today to be with us.
Of course. Thank you for the lovely intro.
Oh, thank you. So I am super excited about today's topic. It's all about envy, jealousy, thinking we're like raised in a box as women, right? So I definitely want to delve right into it. And personally, being in personal development industry and growth industry and spirituality and business industry, I think as women, we can definitely relate to this topic as, women facing envy and jealousy. So let's talk about, envy amongst women. Instead of being supportive, why do you think women gossip and bring each other down?
Okay, so I think there's a few aspects that come into this, and you're so right. Like envy and jealousy are things, especially as women, I feel there's such primal emotions from, going back into like our ancestorhood. Envy and jealousy were ways where it was innate for our survival, and it's like written in our DNA in so many different ways because in order for survival, jealousy was something that resources were really scarce and limited. And it was a primal instinct for us to feel like we have to like protect our own or kind of keep to ourselves. And there's like not enough to share or go around, which was really true back in the day, right? Before like agriculture became such a big thing. There was like the revolution around agriculture. Resources were really scarce. And going back into a little bit history about like jealousy and envy, jealousy more particularly, back when women would give birth and have children, there was like a natural selection survival because we didn't have like the tools or the resources to keep all these children alive. So essentially, jealousy goes back into the aspect of men would actually impregnate like multiple different women in order to have like a natural selection of survival. And our DNA as our world has progressed and we've shifted just like so many other like fight and flight survival patterns, those momentums inside of us are still really primal and they haven't shifted to safety, which is like the new norm for us is like there's so much more opportunity that we have and there's so much more resources that we have as people. But yeah, our thinking is still stuck in like, if they're doing this and I can't do this, or there's not enough room for me. And even going back culturally, because, a lot of us can relate to like the cultural aspects of envy and jealousy. I think when we think back into like, when our like grandmothers or great grandmothers would connect, their only relationships that they had were like inside their homes or inside their village. They didn't really have like a life outside of that. And so the only way to connect was to talk about other people. And we obviously know, again, culturally, and I think this still really exists, it's shameful or it's not safe or it brings like pain or guilt or embarrassment if we talk about our own stuff that's going on. So in order to connect, I think a lot of women feel really empowered when they're like misery loves company, essentially. That's so true. So true, right? Yeah. And like you notice
it creates
like
bond and connection.
Yeah. And it creates this fire inside of each other where it's like, yeah, this person feels that way too, because we actually do it as a way to like avoid talking about our own pain, shame, or guilt that we experience as women. And, back then women weren't working. They didn't have like lives outside of those bubbles that they've created. And that was their only resource of connection was to talk about or, point at the like woman who's doing something that's a little bit out of the comfort zone or out of the norm. And that would be a way to like protect your group from, okay, someone does something different or something expansive that's hard and that's like new and that takes a lot of courage. She doesn't belong in our group anymore because we don't do that, or like that's embarrassing or that's shameful, or disrespectful or whatever it may be. But yeah, I think a lot of envy comes from like our innate DNA and then also culturally too. Like it is a survival emotion.
I absolutely love that perspective. And I've never actually heard someone go that deep into it and where it actually stems from. Yeah, really, really where it stems from. Mm-hmm. So I personally think definitely gossiping is more of a social connection. And, do you think it's a means of navigating and understanding their own lives too? Because you kind of delve into this a little bit, but I think it's also projecting your own insecurities, right? Your perception is everything. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So when we talk about gossip, particularly, first I want to kind of highlight, like there's a difference between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is more so like, I have something and this person is a threat to that something. So like, a really common example is like, in relationships, you're jealous of like a partner's coworker or like a friend or something. That's a threat to our internal safety. So it's a threat to, things that are important to us that we hold really close to our heart. Where envy is like quite the opposite. Envy usually doesn't have anything to do with, this person's going to take this away from me. Envy is a really good way where you can actually spot something that you want for yourself, even if though it has nothing to do with this person. So like an example would be, I think you and I have talked about before, like there's like women who post like bikini pictures on Instagram or like workout stuff. And maybe you have no desire to want to post that kind of stuff, but she has confidence. Yeah. And I think when you really pull back and you're just like, oh, why would she do that? Or what would she do that for? It's a way to avoid like, hey, I'm actually lacking confidence and I want to feel more confident in whichever way that looks like for you. And instead we put those pieces so deep into our shadow selves because we deny ourselves from things that we want because we usually think that it's not attainable or it's not in reach for us, or how would I get there? We're pretty lost in that sense of like escaping our comfort zone. And then it turns into gossip because it's like, oh, how could she? Like, how dare she? How embarrassing. And it's a way that we're actually subconsciously projecting like our own shame or our own lack of willingness to do something and point at that. And it's so much easier to point at that other person and then say like, how dare they? And then that becomes like a form of a group connection. I think especially in, we were just talking about this, in friendships where you outgrow friendships and there's not much left there in terms of like growth. Maybe you're not like aligned on the same spiritual path, or you don't have the same things that light you up anymore. What do you have in common? Hating on somebody or like talking bad about somebody, because that's a lot of survival for so many friendships, especially really long friendships, I find.
No, that's definitely so true. And I feel like you do feel lonely initially when you're doing this work because your consciousness level is increasing, right? Yeah. And as you're doing the work, you feel like you're lonely, you cannot relate to other people. Mm-hmm. And then when you do take a step back, you find those type of people who are relating to this topic, who are doing the work, deep work, right? Yeah. So like you and I connected on this, right? And spot on. I think back in 2021, when we first connected, we were having empowering conversations. I still remember that. So yeah, I am always looking and seeking for those connections. And I'm so glad we found each other. And I absolutely love your perspective. And you do really go deep. I love that.
I do. Yeah. And I think like, that's like, you're a perfect example of that. I think you really allowed yourself to like explore that space of like, okay, if I don't connect with these people on these things, and you were in that scarcity space of like, I'm going to hold on to the new and even show up as like my inauthentic self in order to keep this going, even though I know it's not aligned for me, which I think a lot of women want to do, but it's really hard.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we forget that we got to trust the process and we need to really believe in ourselves and who we are. Mm-hmm. And I love the confidence piece. I feel like when you exude confidence, you do attract the tribe. You do also show other women how to be confident, to show up as their authentic self. And I get compliments all the time to be vulnerable and authentic too. And I feel like the more I do that, the more I relate to people.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people do show up as this perfect life sometimes on social media as well. But well, it is not perfect.
No.
Even at my current workplace right now, where I also am part of this organization where I'm helping out with the culture and retention and recruitment, and also coaching as well. We are working on being more authentic. And I found that we are attracting like-minded people and people who are, they want to grow, but also want to care for other people, who show care and want other people to expand as well.
Yeah.
So I think it just comes down to being conscious and how much you are willing to grow. So I love that.
Yeah, there's room for everybody.
Everyone. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, for sure. So in your experience, how does societal pressure impact women's self-esteem? And what strategies do you think women can build and maintain confidence instead of bringing each other down?
Yeah, societal pressures, I feel, are like, because there's so much access to everything at our fingertips, I feel like the societal pressure that women feel is higher than ever. I think even post-COVID.
Why do you think that? It's for women, it's much higher.
I think for women, it's so much higher because there's not only like pressure, there's pressure to be everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's really new for us as women. Like, even new as like 20 years ago, it was more starting to become like more of a common thing where women would like, women were working 20 years ago easily, but it was more of this like ambition to like do your own thing or be like a leader in your career. And I think that is more new over the past 10 years or so. And I think that societal pressure, how it impacts us as women, I think it impacts the way we're never enough. Like, we're never enough. We're never like, we never feel like we're like looking the part. We're never like put together enough. We're not excelling in our careers enough. We're not a good partner enough. We're not hanging out with our girls enough. We're not like taking the content enough. There's so many different avenues. And I think the confusing part for people is all of those avenues aren't supposed to be all for you. You're supposed to have fluidity in the ones that actually make you feel good. And you don't need to like fill all of these cups all of the time. But I think because we see women doing like, so many women are doing this and so many women are doing that. And we're always playing catch up. Like, it's always this catch up game of like, okay, if I'm really good in this one aspect, it's gonna take away a little bit from a different aspect of your life. And I think that's okay. And that's where that competition, like feeling comes in for so many women. And I think the reason, or like a way that we can really start to support and like bring each other up is when you see somebody doing something really cool, or even if it's something that you don't necessarily jive with, I think it's so important to think about how much courage it probably took that person to even share that with like a friend, even if it's
That's
just
so
a friend, or like the world or social media or whatever it might be. And I think often like it's so quick, our innate judgment goes to like, oh, how dare they? Or like, oh, that's interesting. And I think the biggest thing too that we can do in order to like ensure we actually lift each other up is just simply pause and reflect. Like,
oh my God, I love that.
Right? So there's so many, like, I feel like it always goes back to the simple practices. Like, it's so simple if you give it, again, space, a little bit of space, and you actually look at this and like, are you like actually upset at this person? Has this person actually done something that's hurt you or is wrong? Guarantee 99% of the time, you'll be like, no, actually not really. And I really don't care too much about this.
Yeah.
But I don't think we give ourselves that space. And that goes from that instant like scroll or like next conversation or our phone. We like exit this one and jump it to the next one. And I think like, it goes into that selective listening space of like, are you even choosing to explore your emotions around like these triggers or these things? If something either makes you feel anything but neutral, there's a lot there to explore, even if it's like good feelings.
Yeah. And I also feel like there's so many other unrealistic beauty standards as well, right?
Yes.
We forget that.
Yes.
We don't, like you mentioned, we don't need to reach every little thing that
No.
we have these expectations for, right?
Yeah.
And even about the bonding part, I really love the connection where, and I remember this, like even like in my early 20s, if I had a different opinion and I was in a group setting, like I was like looked down upon. It's like, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Like, why do you have a different opinion? Like, you know, it's like a way for us to connect is like, you gotta think my way. It's like, why? But we gotta think different to be different, right? That's how I think. But yeah, I can totally relate to that. As I'm getting older, I find like I'm finding more people that do want to think differently, and they give you space to have a different opinion, even if they don't have the same opinion as you. And I think that's growth. That's profound.
Yeah, which is huge because I think like you nailed that. It's that piece of like, just because you have a different opinion doesn't necessarily mean that like your connection can't survive. But before it did, like before it would mean,
or like isolating someone just because they don't think the same way.
The same way, yeah. Like I remember in so many aspects, like when I was like going through that same kind of growth piece where you would kind of like have a different opinion, or you wouldn't like jump in on those negative comments that like everyone else was talking about or whatever it may be. I remember I used to always get like, oh, like, what are you, like Mother Teresa, like relax, blah, 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 or things like that. And it was almost like, yeah, like people would
scary at first.
Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, am I being like trying to be like Mother Teresa? I'm not trying to be like her. I'm just trying to like share my, or like trying to like, okay, like maybe it's not what we see or whatever it might be. But then, yeah, all of a sudden you're like the peacekeeper of the group. And then that's like a whole nother thing. They're like, what happened to that girl that I knew 2 years ago?
Oh my God,
or like, oh my God, chill. Like, what, you know, it's just us. But it's like, no, I'm actually trying to be this way, like authentically in like all my spaces. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, definitely. I think it comes down to being kind and understanding as well.
Yeah.
And I know you can relate to this. I'm so into energy and healing and manifestation too. And it comes down to that frequency that you're in, right? Like the more you're leveling up, the higher you go. And I feel like the lower frequencies, they fall off, right? Because you're just leveling up. So that's how I perceive it. So profound.
I love that. That is so true.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like, you don't have to love the thing, but like, why exert the like low, like you said, low frequency into like the world?
And I feel like every time I feel like I try to fit in, and I just absolutely dislike that, but I don't like to fit in, but like, I'm like, okay, whatever. Right. But not that I was saying the same thing as like trying to be in that space for longer than I should. And I know I was feeling uncomfortable. I always felt like I was punishing myself, like lack of better words, where I didn't feel like I was being authentic. And I'm like, why am I here thinking about it, resenting it? And there's so many other moving pieces.
You know, I think like even with that, it's like the version of like we shrink ourselves or we like overly expand. And that's like goes back into basic like fight or flight, right? We like shrink when we like flight, even if we're not physically like running out the room, we're like keeping our like opinion to ourselves, or shrinking and being a little bit quiet, or even like body language. I'll notice for right?
Oh my God, you're talking about shrinking. I've definitely done that. And I never used to do that. I'm like, I'm not going to shrink. I'm like, this is who I am. And I felt like I was not giving other people space. But I feel like when you are yourself, you give other people space to be themselves and better versions of themselves, right? So I definitely had to relearn that. I'm like, why am I doing this? Why do I feel like I'm lacking confidence? And I never felt that before. It was because I was shrinking to places where I didn't belong anymore.
Exactly. And then I think like, that's how you said like my body would reject, or I feel like I was punishing myself. That's like us communicating to our inner child that, hey, it's not like you have to stay in these places, even though your intuition is telling you like it's not for you.
Yeah. And has it ever happened to you where your gut is telling you something, but you're not listening to it? And like now it's not whispering anymore. Even like you can't even hear it anymore. Yeah. And now you have to like redo the work and like sit with yourself, and you're like, holy, where did that voice go?
Where did it
alarm
go?
System or like guidance.
There's so many people who are always like, Kristina, like my intuition, like I don't hear it, and I don't. And I'm like, well, think about it like this. Like imagine your friends like calling you up and over and over and over again, or asking you to hang out, or like trying to like talk to you about something. And every time you're like, yeah, I don't have space for you. Bye. Like I'm focused on this friend, or like whatever it might be. And you keep shutting this person down. How quickly do you think your intuition is going to come running back to you after like all the times you ignored it, right?
Yeah, you're always busy.
It's like you got to make space for it to feel safe as well, which is such a great example you shared.
Yeah, no, I love it. So how do you think we should be participating in more empowering conversations and focus on building each other up instead of like bringing each other down?
I think like simply moments like that you and I have had by one is connecting. I think a huge thing is a lot of people don't want to reach out first, which is something that,
I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's an ego-based thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like you really find this person interesting or you really like their content, but yeah, one is like you're not going to follow them because maybe they don't follow you, or like you're not going to message them because they don't like your stuff.
Yeah.
And that's totally ego based. That's just like a way you're keeping yourself small from fear and rejection. And for one, I think if it's somebody you don't know and you actually really like their stuff, you have no idea how much it means. Like, you probably get it when you get a message and you're like, hey, that post really resonated with me.
Oh my God.
One person can like make your day. And I think being vulnerable is like a huge one. I think before you expect to hold space or to be vulnerable, to hold space for vulnerability for other women, it's like try to put yourself out there a little bit more first is a huge one. And I think that's one way we can lift each other up is by normalizing all of these topics that we talk about. Like, it's normal to feel these ways. And I think another like simple one too is I think like supporting each other's like one as businesses is a huge thing. Like, I know there's so many people who always talk about how like, oh, my friends are like the last person to like buy my service or buy my product, right? Which is such a real thing. And then there's these like strangers who are so excited for you. And that's, you know, it goes back into the piece too of like, you're probably feeling some envy or some jealousy there, or some threat to your own. But I think just call it out. Like, even if it's within friendships. I remember one time my hairdresser told me this and it was so true. She's talking about how she's sometimes like, you know, you get jealous of like friends who are in relationships or like expanding in different ways. And she was like, you know what made it so much easier to support my friends? By just telling them. Like, dude, I am jealous as like shit right now, and it has nothing to do with you. But yeah, and she's like, that
is so cool.
It held no more power. She's like, once I said the word, like it, like I didn't like it wasn't like this impairing jealousy where like I like feel small around this person. Like, I just made it open and I outed it, and like I still feel a little bit jealous, but does it make me feel small next to this person? No, because like I don't have to keep this to myself. And I think if anything, if you can do some of those things, I think the one biggest thing is don't participate in those conversations that are happening amongst many women, especially like, you know, the bridal industry is like so big here and people are sharing like, you know, there's personal moments and if you don't have a nice opinion, just don't have an opinion. Like that's as like basic as it can get, right? Yeah.
And it all comes down to like self-love too, right? I think that's so important. I feel like if you don't love yourself, you cannot love anything outside of you. That's how I perceive it. And the more I work on myself, I'm like, I'm loving every little thing in my life. And even if you do not connect with some people anymore who might be different than you, you still love and care for them. And you like hold spaces, even though these people or these situations don't belong in your life anymore. I think that is growth. That is love.
Yes. And
definitely being compassionate.
Yeah. Compassionate and just do your own work. Like, that is the best way you can support other people is just look at your own stuff and like your own shadow and your own like things that are going on for you. And I guarantee like showing up for other people or supporting other people will be so much easier, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. So my last question for you is, and I ask all my guests this, what inspires and motivates you every single day?
Oh, I love that. Okay. This kind of reminds me of like the Jay Shetty podcast at the end when he like asked those 5 questions or whatever. Inspires and motivates me. Oh man, there's so much. Honestly, not every day am I motivated, and that's like the full truth. I think even if I'm being really truthful with you, like the last year was hard. I think like I had a lot of internal transitions going on, but I think my younger self, like in the back of my phone, I'll show you. I believe it's still there. I have a picture.
Oh my God,
of my like
cute.
Baby self in here. And that's kind of a trick I use for inner child is like the days I'm hard on myself or I'm like, oh, like how did you not like do this, or like you said you were gonna do like these 5 things and you did it. I try to sing it to my phone instead, and it's so hard to say. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how come I can hold so much space and like compassion for this younger version of me, but this older one we get so hard on. So days I can't do it for me, I do it for her. The best that I can. Not always like, you know, up to what I want to do. But I think making her proud is like the number one motivator for me. And it's like showing that little girl that like
You can do it.
You can do it.
Yeah. And look at you now.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. Well, I want to continue talking about this empowering conversation, but we're definitely going to bring you back, and I want to do more of this. So thank you for being here today. This was awesome. Guys, I will make sure I will add Kristina's Instagram handle below in the description, and make sure you give her a follow. And I'll also add other links as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was so great.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in, Enrich community. Always appreciate your time and energy and supporting me and supporting us. So make sure you give us a follow, subscribe to our channel, and also leave a comment below and any questions that you would like us to answer. So yeah, thank you so much once again. And I'm leaving you with this, like I always do, sending you a lot of love and positive vibes. Take care.